I don't quite understand what As Ever actually is. It's a brand, it's a range. I mean, how would you actually describe it?
It's a nightmare.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm William Moore, the Spectator's features editor. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Alexander Larman, the books editor for Spectator World, the Spectator's American edition, and the author of 3 books about the Windsors, most recently Power and Glory. We're going to be talking about the controversy between Prince Harry and Sentebale, the charity he set up in memory of his mother Diana. Alexander, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
It's good to be back here, Will.
I can't quite believe we're once again talking about the Sussexes. Every time I think we've got to the end of this well, there's still more water that can be drawn out. This week, it's been quite a huge story, which is that Prince Harry has been accused by the chairwoman of the charity that he set up on his mother of various things. I think I'll read out the full quote, actually, because it's quite worth getting the full thing. She has said that her story is one of a woman who dared to blow the whistle about issues of poor governance, weak executive management, abuse of power, bullying, harassment, misogyny, misogynoir, which I believe means the hatred of black women, and the cover-up that ensued. So it's quite a remarkable string of claims there. What is really going on?
Well, it's good to be back here, Will, in these usual circumstances. And I should say at the outset, we are talking on April Fool's Day, which is appropriate because it appears that yet again, Harry, his wife, and everyone around them have made fools out of themselves. But this is a spectacular story. And actually what's interesting is that most stories about Prince Harry at the moment start off big and then get smaller because the most important story is usually the immediate one. This one started off bad and it's got worse. It's always been interesting because you look at Harry and you look at what exactly is going to be the final nail in the coffin of his reputation. And I never saw his being accused of misogynoir, of all things, because obviously he has set so much store by his own progressive credentials, and indeed he and Meghan have been very careful to present themselves as the model of a modern progressive mixed-race couple. So for him to have this woman who he's worked with for many years on the Sentebale charity turn around and effectively accuse him of racism, in addition to bullying and in addition to poor governance of this charity, which, as you say, was set up in memory of his late mother, it must hurt. And you can see that there's this briefing and counter-briefing going on in the media at the moment, where it's very clear that most stories about Harry, I don't think, bother him that much on a professional basis. It might bother him on a personal basis. There might be some spilt organic whole milk in the Montecito kitchen. But he also knows that it's part of a territory, whereas this is basically cutting to the heart of who he thinks he is, because he's always tried to present himself as somebody who is above such things, who is dealing with charities and actually believing what he's doing. But for somebody who he has worked with so closely to come round with these, let's be quite honest, extraordinary and fairly unprecedented, very personal allegations, it is going to be enormously harmful, and the story is keeping on going. Now, what he must be hoping is that he's going to win, that she's going to become discredited, that he will be proved to be right, that he will be vindicated, and then, like many other stories involving him, the haters will be proved wrong and he will be able to hold his head up high. But if he isn't, and any of these stories stick, it's going to be absolutely catastrophic for him.
Well, I wondered actually if perhaps we need to explain a little for viewers who may not be aware what exactly Sentebale is and how Harry became involved with it in the first place. As you say, it was set up in honour of his mother, wasn't it?
Yes, and it's a charity that's based in Africa. It's based in Lesotho, and its whole point is that it's designed to basically give aid to people who might be suffering of HIV. And it's interesting because it's one of the very few charities that Harry has continued to support after his leaving public life. The other one, of course, being the Invictus Games. And I don't think that anybody, especially not me, a couple of weeks ago would have had it on their bingo card for 2025, that this apparently blameless organisation, which Harry was very much working on behind the scenes, it was not something which he was trumpeting the way he's trumpeted so many of his other achievements. I mean, you would have always said, well, in the credit column, there is his work in Sentebale, which he doesn't demand publicity for. He just gets on and does it. Now you're thinking, well, it's not quite clear why he hasn't demanded publicity, because clearly what's been going on. And there's been a series of very detailed allegations against him, some of which suggested that while he was filming his Netflix series with Meghan, they were basically elbowing people from Sentebale out of the way. You just think to yourself, again, these are big accusations, they're damaging accusations, and I should add, they haven't been proved yet. It's very much a he said, she said situation in the media at the moment. The fact that they exist, I mean, I think for the accusations of misogyny and racism, he must be sitting there thinking, I'm not racist, I can't be racist. And of course the answer is, but if somebody who is herself black making these allegations towards you, it's not enough just to bat them away and say, I can't be racist, because you're thinking, well, she isn't saying that you've bullied her out of this position. She isn't saying any of this stuff for fun. She's saying it because clearly she is as invested in the Sentebale charity as he is. So it'd be very interesting to see how this pans out, because this could be, after a very, very long list of controversies and difficulties over the last 5 years, finally the point at which the progressive establishment take against Harry.
So how would you expect the Sussexes, or perhaps the allies of the Sussexes, to respond to allegations of this kind?
Well, the allies of the Sussexes, i.e. the Sussex Squad online, have of course taken to Twitter to lambast this Dr. Sophie Chandauka, her person, in every single conceivable way they can. And a lot of it's racist, of course, as you would expect, but a lot of it is also the deranged murmurings of a bunch of people with nothing better to do than to get on their keyboards and type away at speed. Not that I don't like these people, I just don't understand what makes them tick. But of course, what's interesting now is that you can badmouth her all you want, and it's very easy to be racist against her because she's a black woman. But I think that what would be much more interesting is if Harry has to come forward at some point within the next week, I'd say, and actually categorically go through these various accusations that she has levelled at him, not just deny them in this blanket I'm progressive way, but actually to provide some kind of explanation as to why she'd been making them, the circumstances under which these examples of bullying or bad governance took place, what his attitude is, because the only way of making this story go away is to refute it in what most people would see as a satisfactory and candid fashion.
So what are some of the specifics of the things that he's been accused of? So I obviously read the statement at the beginning of some of the more general accusations of harassment, misogyny, and so on. But are there specifics that have been levelled against him?
Well, frustratingly, it's quite hard to actually see what the details are. I mean, there was some instance of some filming at some Netflix show where Harry was supposed to have sent an email that was angry, and it was essentially saying, you're not paying my wife enough respect, because obviously, as well we know, Harry's attitude towards his wife is one that she must be venerated and taken seriously and paid respect at all times by all people. But I can't help feeling that the meshing of Sentebale and Meghan is not a happy one, because they are essentially two entirely separate organisations and operations, and the only thing they have in common is Prince Harry. So the idea but you would essentially say, well, you weren't very nice to my wife, and that's in part why I have to resign from the charity. You think most people would see that as absolutely insane behaviour.
It's going to be quite hard for the Sussexes to respond to this, isn't it? For the reasons that you've stated about, they consider themselves very progressive people. So are they now in a situation of rather damned if you do, damned if you don't? Because if they do respond, it'd be very easy from I suppose a progressive perspective to say, well, look, you're not taking these accusations of racism and misogyny from a black woman seriously enough. That's if you do respond and don't respond, it seems to me.
Well, it seems to me as if Harry should go the full 180, that rather than being this progressive liberal figure, he should embrace life in Trump's America and come round to the idea that he can actually start to become a racist himself. He should start to say the most appalling things on the grounds what everybody else is saying. It's in my adopted country now, why shouldn't I? I mean, that might be taking it a bit far, but if Harry was just, if that's what he wanted to do, it wouldn't be as strange as it would have been a year ago. I mean, I can't see it happening somehow, but if he did, then he'd become a hero to all kinds of people who currently loathe him.
Well, maybe the MAGA crowd would stop trying to deport him. I suppose then, might we expect Harry to withdraw even further from the spotlight than he already has done?
Well, it's strange, isn't it? Because he keeps coming forward and going away. It's rather like a shy dancer at a very busy dance floor. Step on, step off, step on, step off. And of course, what's interesting is clearly a deal has been struck between him and Meghan that he had his time in the spotlight with Spare and the publication of that. Now it's her turn for the launch of As Ever, which has happened this week, in fact. And
oh yeah, should we talk a bit about that?
Yes,
and can
let's
you
talk
explain to me? I don't quite understand what As Ever actually is. It's a brand. It's a range. I mean, how would you actually describe it?
it's a nightmare. I suppose As Ever Meghan. It doesn't sound as good as she thinks it sounds, because it's not As Ever Meghan. It sounds like something that somebody might have said in a bad 70s sitcom. You can imagine an advert with Leonard Rossiter and Joan Collins ending with As Ever. It being some liqueur you can't drink or something like that. But what Meghan has offered the world is this homeware range, and it's been a very long time coming, because there was another name for it which she had to change because the name had been copyrighted. So, copywrote. And so she's had to release this. There's a wildflower honey, there's a jam, I think something involving a crepe as well. But what's very funny is when you start to break it down, it's not very impressive. This thing has been months, if not years, in the making. It's quite a thin little range of stuff. And of course, it's for sale in precisely 2 places in America at the moment. One is in a shopping mall in Dallas, which means that JFK's assassination is only the second worst thing to have happened there now. And the other one, and I thought this was absolutely wonderful, is there's this town in Pennsylvania called King of Prussia, which suggests that, try as she might, Meghan still loves her royalty, doesn't she? Mm. But what I found particularly amusing is that Meghan put out this statement whereby she said, after you finished with my raspberry preserve, give somebody a love note in the jar. And I'm thinking, somebody gave me a love note in Meghan's leftover jam jar. They really would despise me, and rightly so.
And is this been launched off the back of her Netflix show? Is it a tie-in with Netflix in some way?
It is indeed a tie-in with Netflix, but the fact that there are 2 Netflix home stores mean that, I was expecting it to be available everywhere. I was expecting to go to my local John Lewis or my local Aldi, depending on demand, and to be able to buy my Meghan preserves. And I was indeed hoping, Will, that you and I would be having a tasting at this precise moment. But I don't think we're going to be able to somehow, alas.
No, alas. Finally, I suppose, can we move on to perhaps slightly more serious royal matters, which is there was a news story last week, of course, that the King had to briefly suspend public duties because of minor hospital treatment, or at least it was said to be minor, in his ongoing cancer treatment. He's now returned to public life since. What do you make of that news last week? It's a bit of a reminder, isn't it, about his ongoing illness and the severity of it?
Certainly. One thing we have to remember is that Charles was diagnosed with cancer, a still unknown form of cancer, over a year ago. And since then, he looks noticeably older, which obviously a very gruelling form of treatment will do for him. But what I feel is quite hard to get round is the sense that we're not being given the complete picture, because Buckingham Palace and Clarence House have never been known for their openness and candour when it comes to health issues. But you get these very small updates, and it's always accentuating with the positive, especially because you send out anonymous sources to brief everything is going in the right direction. This is a very minor hiccup. Now, of course, you have to hope that is the case. You have to hope that Charles really is on the mend and that he is going to get better. But the fact that he's still having, obviously, very gruelling and very invasive cancer treatment, which is necessitating hospital visits, you would be forgiven for thinking that you're being sold a line and that there might be more to it than meets the eye, which of course brings in the other question about how much candour we can expect from the royal family, because obviously what we have with Harry and Meghan is we have perhaps too much candour. Perhaps we should be grateful that we're not having this rammed down our throats every single moment, rather like Meghan's jam. But on the other hand, there's also the question of what is the royal responsibility to the subjects. If you're lying to the people, is that acceptable? Because essentially it is a public organisation and a private family. Mm. And we've seen over the last year, especially with Kate Middleton's illness, there's been a real sense of what are we owed? Because essentially if one of our friends was going in for cancer treatment, they would not be responsible for having to tell us everything. They would be able to keep stuff to themselves. So you can argue that at the most primal level, Charles has to have a degree of privacy, and he is owed that. But on the other hand, does that mean that people around him, courtiers around him, can put out stories which might be misleading or might at least be not being entirely accurate. So it's very much a live issue at the moment, and I think it'll probably stay like this until we're given the hopefully imminent news that Charles has the all clear. But I mean, whether we're going to hear that or not, I don't know.
Alexander, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you, Will.